Hi, and welcome to Adaptive Leadership, Exercising Leadership in Times of Deep Transformation. I'm Ashraf, and I'll be giving you an overview of the Adaptive Leadership Framework, which has been developed by Ron Heifetz, Marty Linsky, and others at Harvard Kennedy School over the past 30 years. The purpose of this webinar is to expand leadership capacity in the Muslim world. The idea is to help current leaders and those who want to exercise leadership to develop their capacities to become more effective at leading their organizations and their societies through times of deep adaptive change in the Muslim world. The adaptive leadership model itself was developed based on expertise and observations and research in a number of domains like sociology, anthropology, negotiations, political science, observations of the animal kingdom, biology, and even the music. And it starts by differentiating between two types of challenges that people and organizations or systems, as we'll call them, face. The first is technical challenges, and the second is adaptive challenges. A technical challenge is one where the answer exists somewhere, and we simply need to find the right resources, the right skills, people with the right skill sets to come to the table, have the resources available, and be able to put together the solution that we need. For example, if someone were to fall and break their knee, people know how to address that challenge. The person gets taken to the hospital, they go to an ER, we call a surgeon who knows the steps to go through to fix the physical issues with the knee. The person can see a physiotherapist for the next several months. They can see an occupational therapist to help them with their work. And within some number of months, they go through a standard set of tasks, and they emerge, as well off as they were before, or almost. So they make it through that challenge because we have figured out how to deal with exactly that challenge. On a much larger scale, another technical challenge might be developing a nuclear program. Obviously, that's something much more complicated. Very few countries have managed to do it, even though many countries have been bringing a lot of resources to bear on that issue for decades. But still, the fact is, all that is needed is the right skill sets and the right resources. We know how to develop a nuclear program. We know how to, what all the components are, and there are people who know how to build them. It's just that they are few and far between, and there are legal issues and so on. But if a country puts its mind to it and commits the right resources for the right amount of time, they will be able to achieve a nuclear program. So it is still a technical challenge. That aspect of it is a technical challenge. Whether the culture of the country accepts a nuclear program and the responsibilities that come with it is another issue. That starts getting into the adaptive challenge area. So an adaptive challenge is one that really forces us to look at our culture, at our sense of identity, at our value system, at our way of life, and make sure that they are consistent. So that there isn't a gap between our aspirations, our belief in who we are, and our the set of ethics that we live with, and reality, the reality of how we're living. For example, if we are a very proud people, proud of how our religion, for example, tells us to not discriminate against those of a different race or ethnicity or gender, and that's something we're proud of. But we look around our society and find that we do regularly discriminate, then that's an adaptive challenge. We believe in one set of values, but we live our lives in a way that contradicts that set of values. And usually we will continue to do that until someone says, points out that we are essentially living a lie. We're living in a way that is inconsistent with who we are and who we like to think we are. And then that, the person who's taking on the leadership role of telling us this would have to convince us to take on the responsibility of making changes in either our value system or our behavior or both in order to bring them more in line with each other. And that is a very difficult thing that people don't like to hear, first of all. No one wants to hear that they're living in a way that is contradicting their values. And it's a very difficult thing to actually address. No one wants to change their value system or their perception of themselves at such a deep level. And so they will tend to push back, will tend to find ways to avoid having to do that. And that's why adaptive challenges are much more complicated and take a lot longer to get through than technical challenges. If we look at a couple of characteristics of adaptive versus technical challenges, we find that in a technical challenge, the problem definition is very clear. It's pretty straightforward to figure out what the problem is. The person broke their foot, or we need a new source of energy, nuclear energy. So it's straightforward what the problem is. The solution and implementation is also clear. It might not be easy, but it's clear. We can figure it out. We can bring the right people with the right skill sets, and they can give us the solution, and they can help us with an implementation plan. So the responsibility for the work can fall on the technical authority or the technical expert or the person or people in a position of authority. They can basically decree that we will commit the resources to making this happen. So the president of a country or the king or the head of an organization can decide that implementing this new technology is going to be our strategic priority right now. And with that gives the marching orders to the other levels within the system, and people simply follow the steps that were determined in the solution and the implementation plan, and get the work done. But the authority for really getting things done and making sure they get done falls on the shoulders of the authority figure. In an adaptive challenge, the problem definition is not clear. We actually started out in a hazy area. What we see is the symptoms of the adaptive challenge, but it's not easy to see the challenge as a whole. In order to truly understand what is at the base of the adaptive challenge, we would have to get all the stakeholders who are involved to sit at a table and start discussing what the issues are. And only then will we be able to surface the underlying issues that have created this gap between our values and our reality. Or if there is a clash of two sets of values, we won't fully comprehend that until we get people with different viewpoints to start a debate, if you will, about what are our values, and how are we actually observing our behavior, and do we see the differences between them. So we have to go through a process, a pretty deep process of self-reflection and debate in order to understand, figure out what the full extent of the problem is. And then once we do that, the figuring out the solution and implementing it also requires this communal learning. We can't just bring someone to tell us what to do and how to do it. We have to figure it out throughout a long process of continuous change and exploration. And so the responsibility for the work falls on the shoulders of the stakeholders. This is not something that the authority figure or technical experts can tell us, do this and you will be fine anymore. It's about changing who we are. And so we really have to accept that we will go through this deep transformational process, and we have to engage with the process ourselves. And that's not something that someone can force us to do. They can force us to change certain behaviors, but to really believe in this change and take it on board would require us to do all of the work, us being the stakeholders. And most challenges are really a mix of technical and adaptive. And we relatively quickly can figure out the problem definition, but the solution and implementation tend to be very complicated and require trial and error, experimentation, and the responsibility can be split between the authority figures and the stakeholders. The authority figures will set the agenda, if you will, and will keep pushing for the work to get done, and the stakeholders do the work themselves. Now, because the work is so painful, stakeholders don't want to do it. And so we talk about the disequilibrium level that people have to go through, or the discomfort level that people have to go through. So if you look at the level of discomfort here, we find that at a certain level, there is a threshold of learning. So below this threshold of learning in this area, we have in this area down here, we have the zone of comfort. This is where people like to spend their time. They're comfortable. There's no need to change who they are. There's no need to push for a review of their values or of their sense of identity or of their behavior. So they will tend to want to be here, and they won't actually do any deep transformational work until someone pushes them above this threshold of learning. Only then will they be uncomfortable enough that they will start to do some adaptive work. And so we enter this rope or range of productive disequilibrium. And it's in that range that our disequilibrium, our discomfort is so high that we are kind of forced to engage with the idea that there's something unsustainable going on here. There's almost an identity crisis going on, and we have to figure out what's happening, and then actually engage with the change process. Unfortunately, there's also a limit to tolerance, to tolerating that disequilibrium. So at some point, if we push too hard and we cross that limit, people will be in a period of total chaos, severe confusion, and unhappiness, and they will tend to rush back down to the zone of comfort. So they will follow anyone who tells them, you don't need to worry about this anymore. I'll figure it out for you. There's no real problem. You can stop dealing with all this change business. And they will quickly follow that and go back to going about their daily lives, even if the issue hasn't been resolved. So the key for exercising leadership in an adaptive challenge is to keep people, keep them in this range of productive disequilibrium, and constantly figure out whether you're pushing the envelope too much, you've raised the heat to where they're about to hit their limit, or whether you've let things calm down too much and they've fallen back into this area and have stopped engaging with adaptive change, and make little and small experiments here and there to intervene and keep the disequilibrium range in this productive area. Now, properties of an adaptive challenge, there are 10 properties that can help you identify an adaptive challenge. One, as I said, is that it consists of a gap between aspirations and reality, or between competing sets of values. It also means that the adaptive work that's needed to narrow that gap will require communal learning, will require people to work together to figure out both the challenge and the solution. 3, the learning involves separating out what's precious and critical, the part of your identity, from what's expendable. So you will have to accept some amount of loss. We actually call leadership the ability to sell loss, because your job as an adaptive leader is to convince people to accept losing part of who they are. Which is a very difficult thing, of course, for them to accept, and is a very risky thing for you to be doing. But that's what will separate the effective and successful adaptive leaders from those who are not. One of the ways to help you be more successful is this ability to figure out what is really precious and cannot be given up. And what is expendable? Which parts of our value system are truly critical to who we are and must be kept, and which parts are now holding us back and must therefore be rethought and renegotiated so that we can move forward and address our adaptive challenge. And so the losses involve learning to refashion these loyalties that we have to certain viewpoints or certain ideologies, loyalties to our past. For example, there's a great story of the grandfather who, the Palestinian grandfather who hands his grandson a key on his deathbed, where they've been living in the U.S. for the past 50 years after having been forced out of Palestine, and he gives him a key on his deathbed and says, "This is the key to our home in what has become Israel, and it is now your job to make sure we go back and get our home back and enter the house with this key." Well, that's a tremendous amount of loyalty that the grandson now has. Tremendous amount of responsibility of holding this key, and with it the aspirations and the dreams of his grandfather and his family. And he will be under an incredible amount of pressure from his own self to fulfill that promise. But that also will creates a lot of challenges in terms of participating in a peace process, coming to some sort of settlement between Palestinians and Israelis. And if the son isn't able to go back, he will face that identity crisis. So somehow he will have to renegotiate that loyalty with his grandfather, rethink about what it means to be the holder of the key to the ancestor's home, the home that cannot be gotten back anymore. 5, adaptive work is value-laden. So unlike a lot of traditional views of leadership that say that leadership is about getting things done, this says that adaptive work is adaptive leadership is about getting the right things done. So there is value, a value judgment there. You have to decide what is the right thing for my organization, for this society. What is the thing that needs to happen? Not just what is the next thing that we can do. And problem-solving responsibility shifts from the leadership or the authority figures or the experts to the stakeholders. The adaptive work requires a much longer time frame than technical work because of the amount of deep transformational change that needs to take place. And it's experimental. We don't really know what the future will look like until we try something. And we'll have to keep making small attempts, small experiments, try something, see how well it goes, and then decide what the next thing to try is. And constantly look for that feedback to tell us, A, are we headed in the right direction? And B, are we going about it the right way? So those small experiments can help us either continue on the path or adjust our path. And adaptive challenges generate that disequilibrium, which is traditionally something you don't want to have, but it's actually necessary in an adaptive situation because it's disequilibrium that enables learning. And finally, the solutions to adaptive challenges face work avoidance strategies. Work avoidance is what we call people's refusal to engage with the adaptive work. Basically, people find it so difficult, so painful, that they will try to get out of doing it in a variety of ways that we'll talk about now. But first, let's define leadership. So we talk about adaptive leadership. We've talked about adaptive. What does adaptive mean? We define that. Let's define leadership. Within the adaptive leadership model, unlike a lot of other views of leadership, we're defining leadership in a very specific way today. So I'll call it helping people move from where they are to where they need to be. And a couple of elements here are very deliberately written. One is that it's about helping people. As an adaptive leader, you can't be the one who has the answers, as opposed to the traditional view of leadership, where the leader is the guy who has the vision and understands the whole problem and has the solution. No, here, all you can do is work with people to get them to move from where they are to where they need to be. So you can help them along the way, but you can't be the guy who has the answers, because by definition, no one person or no small group of people have the answer to an adaptive challenge. It's actually the entire system that the answer has to be created by the entire system or discovered by the entire system. We talk about helping people move, and deliberately pick this active verb because it's a lot of work. There's a lot of work that has to happen in an adaptive challenge situation, and people will have to take that work on. So they will be doing the moving. You will be helping them along, and they start from where they are. So the first task will be to identify what is our status quo today. What is the current situation, and what is the challenge that we're facing and why? So assessing the current situation to where they need to be. And that's really one of the big differentiators between adaptive challenges and technical challenges. Because in an adaptive challenge, people will not necessarily want to go where they need to go. But a good adaptive leader will help them get to where they need to be despite their refusal to go there. So you have, just as you would be selling loss, you will be convincing them that they need to move to point B, to this new place, even though they don't want to, but it is the right thing for them to do. A few characteristics of adaptive leadership. Leadership is an activity. It's not a position. We don't talk about the leader. We try to separate leader from authority figures. So we talk about leadership as something that anyone can practice, regardless of whether they have or don't have authority. And it's not based on personality traits. It's not just a matter of being charismatic, for example. And it's not based on a certain amount of knowledge because you're not a technical expert on something. And it's not based on your position. You can exercise leadership from any position within an organization. It's not value-free. It's not just getting things done. You can be a very good manager if you have the skills to get things done. But to be a good adaptive leader, you have to get the right things done. So there is the value judgment again. And frankly, it's very dangerous work. And people have to be very careful when they take on the mantle of adaptive leadership, because it will put them in really difficult situations. They will disappoint a lot of people. They will do things that are, that contradict the traditional values of their community, and they will suffer a backlash as a result. So it's very important to keep in mind that that this is going to be very difficult, and that you will have to anchor yourself before you're able to withstand the strong winds of rejection of adaptive work. Now, we talked about leadership being different from authority. So let's talk a little bit about authority. Authority can be a resource and a constraint on leadership. As a resource, it allows you to set the agenda, for example. Someone in a position of authority can declare that we have to tackle this adaptive challenge, and that highlights the adaptive challenge. But at the same time, being in a position of authority will put a constraint on you, because people in positions of authority will tend to tell people what they want to hear, because they're expected to do certain things, and they will tend to do those things in order to maintain their power, to maintain their authority. You can even think of authority as being a contract for services. It can be either a formal or informal contract, but the fact is people are authorizing you to have a certain amount of power, in return for which they expect you to do certain things for them. So they entrust you with power. That power gives you resources that that allow you to do things for them, but you can't just use it any way they want. Because they trust you. Trust is essentially essentially means that you are predictable. You have to behave in predictable ways. They expect you to make the kind of decisions they would make in your place, because you share their values. If you don't make a decision that they're comfortable with, then you disappoint them, because now you're telling them that you don't share their values. So you're less predictable. Next time a question mark comes up, they will wonder, will he actually do the same thing I would do or not? And so they might not trust you as much as they used to. The other thing is, they want you to be predictable by showing them that you are competent enough to handle any challenge that comes along. So if you're in a technical situation, they expect you to fix the problem, right, or bring the resources that they need to fix the problem. But in an adaptive situation, if you tell them, no, this is not a problem I can fix, it's too big, or it requires you to change, that also will disappoint them, because you're basically showing them that you don't have the competence to fix the problem, even though it's not really about your competence, but about the problem being in who we all are. But still, you have just disappointed their trust, because you weren't able to just make the problem go away. And then they expect very specific services from you. So research on in the animal kingdom and in organizations, small and large, and in formal and informal groups, has all shown that there are some fairly standard services that are expected from authority figures. There are three main areas of services that are expected. The first thing is to set direction. So you're expected to tell people where the group is headed. And if you're a good enough authority figure, you'll be able to do that. If you fail to set the direction, you again disappoint them, and therefore lose their trust and lose their authorizing you, lose the power that comes with that. So that creates a difficulty for people in positions of authority. It creates a constraint on them, because in an adaptive situation, you won't know what the direction is. You may be able to point to a very general direction, but you can't be very specific with any amount of certainty, because you just don't know. The whole, by definition, the adaptive challenge is something you will all have to figure out together, and the direction you go in is something you will have to try out by experimentation. So you immediately start disappointing them by not being able to provide a very clear and guaranteed direction to safety. And that brings up the second service, which is protection, keeping them safe. Whenever there is a conflict within the group, it is the authority figure who's expected to resolve it. Whenever there's an external threat against the group, it is the authority figure who's expected to provide the protection, provide the plan, and deal with that threat. But in an adaptive challenge, it's hard to do that because you don't really know what the threat is. So you're also at risk of disappointing them in providing that service. And then third is providing order. And order consists of orienting people to roles, letting people know what is expected of them in each of their roles, and holding them to those expectations, preventing or ending conflicts. So whenever there are problems, either internal, within the group, or externally, you are expected to end them and lower the disequilibrium level, and maintaining the norms of the society, the culture, whether it's the culture of the organization or the culture of the country. It's still the expectation that the authority figure will maintain those norms for everyone. So if you are trying to lead adaptively from a position of authority, what are the things you'll be facing when you're providing the services? Well, in providing direction, traditionally, in a technical situation, you would provide the problem definition and the solution, right, as an authority figure. But in an adaptive situation, the best you can do is really identify the challenge by framing the key questions and issues. So you would ask questions that would get people to think about and talk about the adaptive challenge. When you're providing protection in a technical situation, you would be expected to actually protect them from external threats. In an adaptive situation, all you can do is disclose the external threats, highlight the fact that because of the challenge we're facing right now, we are likely to get into a situation where we will face such and such an external threat. And that's very different than protecting them from it. When providing order, instead of orienting people to their current roles, you actually would have to disorient them from current roles. Otherwise, the change process won't happen. And you will also have to resist orienting them to the new roles too quickly, partially because the new roles, if you orient them to them too quickly, it might turn out to be that those new roles are not actually the final ones, the correct final ones. And the other thing is, if you orient them to new roles too quickly, even if the roles are the correct ones, they they won't have gone through the full transformative process without taking their time. So you really have to provide the time for them to do the internal work needed to go through this transformative process. In terms of conflict, instead of restoring order, you have to actually expose the conflict or protect those who are letting it emerge, because that's how you start dealing with it. And you can actually look at conflict as a source of creativity for creative solutions by bringing people who have lots of different ideas, and having them in the same room discussing and debating those ideas. That range of ideas together might bring up some new ideas to solve the problem that no one's thought about before. And then finally, in terms of norms, instead of maintaining norms in a technical situation, your job would be to challenge the norms or let them be challenged, because it's those norms or some subset of those norms that has led to the stagnation that's led to today's gap between our behavior and our values.
It's okay, I can edit that.
Okay.
So what do you want to do?